We stand in the middle of a landscape, surrounded by rolling, grass-clad hills. Not in front of it. It extends to all sides around us in smooth, sliding motion without interruption. A movement we follow while we ourselves are in motion, walking, driving, scanning it with our eyes. Where should we go? We decide, the landscape decides, we adapt to each other, find a way. The series of photographs from the Chile alpine landscapes have their origin in Henrik B. Andersen's concrete actual encounter with a spatial and temporal world to which we can all relate, even without having been there ourselves. It is a landscape that makes immediate sense to us because we have repeatedly oriented ourselves in areas that have unfolded around us, areas that we know how to read and understand, both physically and cognitively. But Henrik B. Andersen's photographs are not just images of beautiful and tamed mountain regions occupying a position somewhere between cultivated land and wild nature. First and foremost, they testify to the artist's interest in landscape understood as a formative principle, a model and a framework for our experience. They show the landscape as an always preliminary and complex interplay of dynamic forces. At the exhibition in the Vartai Gallery, 2 pairs of sculptures are placed on low plinths in 2 rooms. The walls adorned by the landscape photographs on the one side and large drawings done in elongated formats on the other side and on the end wall. The sculptures themselves form a sequence or series. Each object constitutes a complete, continuous whole on which, like the alpine landscapes, has soft curves, depressions and curvatures, but also, in some places, rather more abrupt markings in their surfaces. The total effect characterized by a multi-directionality emphasized by their simultaneously elongated and rounded shapes. As abstract sculptural objects, they offer few references for us to navigate by. They do not resemble or remind us of objects from our own world of tangible experience. However, one cannot completely avoid being reminded of something biological, perhaps of large models of cells or simple organisms. They might well be inspired by scientific images, but they also have distinctly technological feel. On top of their abstract properties, which unite the static and the dynamic, the open and the rounded, we find such references to technical and organic realms alike, making it impossible to draw the line between the non-living and the living, the organic and the inorganic. In almost diagrammatic form, the large drawings demonstrate some of the same dynamic principles as the landscape photographs and the sculptural objects. Despite their elongated horizontal format, they might invite us to read them as musical scores from left to right. It seems to me that it is perfectly possible to step in and begin anywhere in them. They are fields rather than sequences or traces of developments and do not point towards a single dominant direction. In principle, they unfold in all directions and on several levels at the same time. Not unlike an expansive landscape with wide vistas, rock formations, springs, valleys, plateaus, meadows, and deserts. But whereas the primary perceptual modus of the extensive landscape is associated with the body's movement through space, the drawings are inherently of a more abstract and cerebral nature, although they also possess a delicate material appeal. One may well ask oneself why Henrik B. Andersen uses an elongated format rather than any of the many other possible formats for these drawings. I believe this choice to be underpinned by a number of interconnected reasons. His interest in landscape, also in a metaphorical sense, and in wide expanses, plays a significant role. Without specifically wanting to make images of scientific theories, knowledge or insights, he nevertheless bases his work with sculpture, drawing and photography on imagery and models derived from research into nonlinear systems. In doing so, he can achieve a different approach to morphogenesis, composition, spatiality, and the perception of time than the one that has informed dominant positions in classical and modern sculpture. The horizontal formats makes it clear that the drawing does not constitute a closed composition. It does not add up. It does not fall neatly into place as a harmonious and balanced system in which all parts obey the same underlying program. On the contrary, the drawings and the reclining sculptural objects too can make visible the idea of a mass, a substance that gives rise to the most diverse forms through a ceaseless movement. Now we see vortices rising like geysers above the horizon, now flickering, coalescing particle-like points or surfaces, now wave-like fans that appear to radiate out from the continuous horizon, the visible zero point of the drawing around which these forms dance and multiply in soft curves and sudden jumps. The format and the progression of forms in the drawings more than suggests that the movement is, in principle, infinite, pointing to a vast potential for new events to occur in the material. They visualize series or sequences of events in a substance caused by underlying forces of which we can only see the effects. One senses that drawings, objects and photographs made by Henrik B. Andersen in this exhibition describe or observe the world, not an imaginary fantasy world, but our world, the man-made and natural physical world, so that it can no longer be understood as being composed of well-defined and fully finished individuals. If the world is described, as Henrik B. Andersen does, in this way, not as an interaction between already created individuals with their own essence, but as forces and movements that affect each other and which are therefore fundamentally unstable and changeable, then a dynamic worldview emerges, one that cannot, in either social, political or scientific contexts, be reduced to identities, be they personal, national, cultural or physical, or to constant and fixed boundaries, but instead consists of dynamic relationships that take place and change over time. It certainly takes a good deal of imagination, richness of association, compositional ingenuity, and a keen sense of possibilities of a given medium and material to create new 2- and 3-dimensional images that capture events and folds in the material the way that we see here. But Henrik B. Andersen's work does not express a personally experienced or subjective universe. The photographs do not show social events, although they could have done so, for there are indeed forces at play where people meet. They are devoid of people and chilly in more than one sense. The sculptural objects have a simultaneously mechanical and organic feel, and very pointedly do not give off any signals suggestive of the gesture of subjective creation. However seductive they may seem, they also appear foreign to human communication. And they do this in all their anonymity and indeterminacy. The drawings, precise, technical, diagrammatic, do not reaffirm the idea of sensitive artistic freehand drawing, but rather bring to mind experimental architectural drawings, scientific models, or advanced musical scores in alternative kinds of notation. But do these types of images not also share the trait of enabling us to think about and understand complex contexts with them? To create something new with them, buildings, theories, music, and to see parts of the world which we might not otherwise have been able to see? Henrik B. Andersen's drawings are artistically reflected approaches to a world in which forms are incessantly formed, transformed, and reformed in infinite variations. Installed as a totality in the two rooms, but also individually, these works that are shown at the Gallery Vartai insist on the topicality of what might be termed an ecological concept of space and time. According to this view, landscape, be it natural landscapes, cityscapes, soundscapes, mindscapes, or other extended scapes, can be seen as an expression of the fact that forms and events in our surrounding and ambient world are formed through complex and dynamic interactions greater than the individual event. The landscape we stand in and which surrounds us, stretching out in all directions and infinite within its own, never sharply defined boundaries, is not a fully finished, fully formed object that lies at our feet. It is not an image we have before us. Like those of us who move through the landscape, it is itself on its way, moving and becoming, in geological time, in humanly perceived and experienced time. But it can hardly be a surprise for us when it turns out that as we make our way through the landscape, we ourselves are one of the forces that change its shape. For we live in the world, we walk in it, leave traces in it, find and make roads in it. We are part of it. That realization brings obligations.